Hello, my emotional wisdom community. This video is going to be about a personal experience of mine that illustrates why being vulnerable is the only way for true, sustainable integration / healing. Being vulnerable is indeed the only way to truly heal internal wounds, childhood trauma, childhood wounds, and programming that is distorted. Yes, being vulnerable is the only way. First I like to illustrate, first is wanting to be self-aware. Choosing self-awareness is the number one key to begin the rehabilitation process, to begin healing internal wounds, internal traumas. Secondly, is being courageous enough to choose to drop into your vulnerability. Vulnerability, being able to be vulnerable, is actually being able to feel emotions that you have been running away from since childhood. Is trauma, unresolved emotions that feel too big for you. And so therefore you're running from these emotions. And so I'm going to provide an example, a personal example of how dropping into your vulnerability is the way. And it involves my significant other. Not so long ago, possibly 2 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago, I had a moment, an emotional trigger that indicated there was an unresolved wound that still exists in me. And the way that I was able to listen to the wound, to uncover, to unwrap, to decode the wound was through the process of vulnerability. My significant other and I both had a moment of vulnerability. We both were able to understand that our reactions, our response, our reactive responses to one another were indeed a reflection of our wounds, our childhood triggers or childhood wounds that will manifest in the following that I'm about to illustrate. And so I will begin with my example. I was conveying something to my significant other that was important for me. I'm always deep diving. I'm always, having him a part of my journey. So I was illustrating to him a concept, a realization, and I didn't think it was very complex. I've told him other complex, more complicated concepts, and he was been able to grasp them and understand them and digest them. So when I saw that my significant other was asking me questions, when I witnessed that he was asking me questions because he didn't understand what I was saying, that's what I heard, I felt annoyed. I noticed myself respond in an annoyance way to where then he felt pushed back. His body went back and kind of shut down. I saw this happen in real time. And so as I was witnessing this happen all at once, I proceeded to, come into the conversation in a more gentle way and kind of like help him understand what I was trying to say. But I noticed that he already had kind of shut down and felt discouraged. So what I then did was I chose to go into my body and ask myself, why did I get annoyed? Why did I respond in a sense of annoyance when he was asking me questions, when he couldn't understand what I was saying? And in my head, I was confused because I'm like, these concepts are not hard concepts. We've spoken more complex things, but why is he not understanding this, what I'm saying? And obviously it was something that was very important for me that he understood, or that he understands. It was important for me to know that he understands what I was saying. So as I literally apply my teachings to me till this day, I remember closing my eyes and asking, why did this irritate me? What's underneath this irritation? I arrived to anger. I noticed that I was angry, but the way that I funnel my anger is through irritation. Interestingly, because anger is an emotion that's judged. Anger is an emotion that's typically not accepted socially. Society deems anger, an angry person, as bad. So of course, right, our intelligent consciousness chooses strategies to navigate through these emotions, right? It feels anger, but anger is not allowed to come out, not until it's there, you experience a limit to something and then now you're angry. But for me, first I noticed I got irritated when I witnessed my significant other not understand me fully. As I was explaining to him, I felt like, wait, this is not a complex concept. Why is this hard for you to understand? So I got irritated. I chose to go into my body, ask myself why I was angry, what's underneath or ask my body why I was annoyed. Then I arrived to anger. And I said, ooh, if I'm angry, if the emotion that's underneath my annoyance is anger, then that means I'm protecting something. There's a more vulnerable emotion underneath the anger, and anger is projecting as a sense of to feel more empowered. But ultimately, there's another more vulnerable emotion that's underneath the anger. What is that? So as I proceeded to literally, again, communicate with this anger and feel into the sensations that were attached to this anger, I immediately got some imagery. Imagery of my father. My father and I had a very, very strong, almost unexplainable bond as a child. Like I needed my dad, which now I know why, but that's another video. And so I remember in this imagery that showed up, how I needed my dad and how my dad was the one that I believed gave me safety, made me feel secure if I had him around, if I had him understand me. And if I felt that he understood me, everything felt safer. So interestingly, I remembered at that age of being really, really young, whenever my father didn't understand me or possibly didn't want to choose to understand me because, it just obviously parents, that's what we do. It's human behaviorism. We almost want to choose what we wish to understand in our children. And if a child is doing something that we're not approving or we don't approve of, we won't understand that child, right? We will shame the child so to not feel such way or be such way. So it took me back to an incident of when I felt that my father wasn't understanding me. And whether he didn't understand me or he chose not to understand me because it didn't benefit him, the point is I felt not understood. And that feeling felt powerless. It felt very unsafe. It felt lonely. I felt alone because my identity, my self-worth depended on my parents to understand me. In this case, it depended on my dad to understand me. And so when my dad specifically would exhibit tendencies of not being able to understand me, I felt alone. I felt unsafe. And so after many times of feeling this as a child, and you don't have a way to resolve this unsafety and this need, there's anger that starts building. Anger of not feeling understood, anger of not feeling like anyone is with you. Anger essentially exhibits a frustration of not having something met, right? And of course, we choose the anger to embody anger because anger feels a little bit more empowering than just feeling hopeless, powerless, lonely, alone, because you're alone in your own feelings. You're alone in your own concept. You're alone in your own belief system. You're alone but mainly you're alone in your own feelings, and the people that you need are not validating you. So when that happens over and over, obviously there's a frustration and there's anger. So how does this apply with my significant other? Immediately as I was remembering these emotions, remembering those moments in time of when I needed my father to understand me, and there were moments that he didn't, I felt alone. And after feeling alone, I felt angry because it felt easier, felt more empowering to feel anger instead of hopeless, right? And so I immediately was able to correlate here what was happening, because I depend on my significant other as my partner. I depend him to understand me. I depend on that so I can feel understood, so I can feel seen, so I can feel loved. So I depend on him to be able to feel what I'm feeling. We all do, but it's another story. But because I know what I need to feel safe, to feel secure, I need to know that he feels where I'm coming from. Most importantly, feels where I'm coming from. Can understand me. And so, when my significant other reflected back to me that he couldn't understand me, I immediately channeled that little girl inside of me. I channeled that little girl that felt not understood by her father and by the men in her life, because I'm the youngest one with 4 other men and another sister, but still, it immediately, essentially at that moment in time when I felt that my significant other, who was supposed to understand me and feel me, understand me through the process of feeling what I'm feeling, when I saw that he didn't, and logically I felt is an easy concept to understand, I felt threatened. I felt threatened that if he can't understand this, is he even able to understand me? Just as I felt when I was little. Threatened. So I dropped. So essentially, I witnessed that, and I dropped into a core wound. A wound of, I'm afraid, and I'm terrified, and I'm fractured. In an area of my life when I was little, I wasn't felt understood. I didn't feel understood. And that's when you have that wound inside of you still, you're going to respond from that wound. Whenever anyone you deem as a person that should understand you, you're immediately going to channel that wound, that unresolved trauma that has power over you. You're immediately going to be hijacked by this wound. And so when I unveiled all of that, I witnessed I got irritated. I went into my irritation. I dropped into anger. I was really angry. I said, ooh, I'm angry. There's a more vulnerable emotion that I'm protecting, but I'm choosing to be angry, or essentially I'm choosing to be irritated than to be angry, than to be vulnerable and feel alone. in my own feelings. And so, as I noticed this, and I was in this vulnerability, I chose to share it with my significant other, literally. As I unraveled, unpacked this, what was happening to me, I proceeded to share it with my significant other. And it gave him ease that it wasn't about him. He then gave himself permission to share what he felt. He's like, yeah, Josie, when you got irritated with me, and I noticed that irritation energy, I pulled back. And I then told myself a story. I can't be honest with her? I'm confused. This is literally what was going through his mind. I am confused that right now I'm exercising an aspect of me that I need practice in, because one of his desires is to embrace communication. One of his desires, my significant other's desires, is to embrace communication. And so, at this moment of him embracing communication, asking me questions, so to understand, he was shamed. Because my irritation made him feel some shame. He didn't decode the shame. He just felt it as, I'm doing something bad. And for him, that's a wound of his. He's afraid of feeling like he did something bad, as if he's the bad guy. And essentially, this is what he's telling me. He's telling me, when you responded with annoyance, I felt, what did I do? Then he felt bad, and then he felt confused. I'm trying to embrace being more communicative, and I'm being shamed for it. I feel like the bad guy now, which is it hurt him. And so he pulled back and he just closed up. Essentially his coping mechanism. He shut down and he didn't want to continue to ask questions. So I proceeded to ask him. I said, how do you feel? Continue to elaborate. And he wanted to judge me. He felt called to say, this is what you did. Tell me to be more communicative, to share, to be more vocal. Yet there's times that I don't feel safe. And so he's like, I'm confused. And so essentially he wanted to blame me. He didn't want to, but he essentially wanted to say, well, look at you. The way you're responding is not inviting enough for me to do so. And I think this is a very fascinating thing, because I'm like, here I am explaining where it's coming from. He then understood. And then here's a missing piece to this whole situation, is that he then unveiled that the reason why he was asking all those questions was because he wanted to apply to his personal life. He understood what I was saying, but those questions, extra questions that he was asking, that made me believe like he wasn't understanding me, were because he wanted to personalize what I was saying. He wanted to personalize it to his own life, how this was playing out in his own life. So those questions stemmed from that objective, which when he expressed this to me after we were being vulnerable, it gave me so much clarity. And I was able to tell him what then I needed, right? I said, well, next time, because clearly I get triggered, it would help if you gave me more backstory. And he's like, absolutely, but sometimes I can get intimidating because of the way you're responding, right? But this is what I mean in terms of when you're being vulnerable and explaining the process of what's happening to you, the process of your triggers and your traumas, and how what we hear is different than the intention of it all, right? His intention was not remotely what I was undergoing. His intention wasn't to make me feel like I was not understandable. He essentially understood what I meant. He just wanted to apply it to his own personal life. So he was asking additional questions that I then heard, is he not understanding me? So once he delivered that he understood me, all he really wanted was to make it personal to his own life, like apply it to his own life and kind of like understand it from that angle. It completely gave me an immense level of relief, but I was also able to tell him what I needed. Next time, if possible, try to give me the full story. Try to be detailed, because that is going to help me on of what's really happening, right? It's going to help me on explaining things even better or from a different angle, so you can be able to apply it on your own circumstances, right? Your own life, your own experiences. But now I'm going to proceed on part 2. In the same moment in time, when all of this was happening, I then asked him, when you pull back, what else happened? Because you were reactive. I go, I know, what I do know is that when you pull back, it's because you feel not safe to further communicate and to talk and to express. But what's underneath that protective mechanism? What's underneath it? Why do you resort to pulling back and just shutting down? What's the wound underneath that shutting down approach? We proceeded to go deeper. In the beginning, he was defending himself. That's the approach he took. I kept on encouraging him to go deeper. Like, okay, there's a difference. When you're defending yourself, you're still in a protective state. You're still you're not getting vulnerable. I'm going to repeat that. When one is needing to defend themselves as to why they're doing what they're doing, we're missing the point. It is not going vulnerable. It is not going into the vulnerable emotion. So in this case, while he's defending his doings, he's not being vulnerable. So I said, no. I get what you're doing. I get it. I get that I triggered you by me getting annoyed. You felt this overwhelmness of shame, and so you shut down. That shame and shutting down is where the wound is. What are you hearing? What are you actually hearing? I was encouraging him to go deeper and deeper. Ultimately, we unraveled that for him, whenever he's asking questions and someone gets irritated or gets annoyed, what he's actually hearing is, I'm not capable. I'm not smart enough to articulate this. Am I stupid? Am I not fast enough? So that's the wound. The more vulnerable emotion that he was protecting as he's defending himself, well, first it's pulling back and then needing to defend himself. The more vulnerable emotion from those actions, those cover-up emotions, those are cover-up emotions, I like to call them, was the core belief of him feeling like he wasn't enough, that he wasn't competent, that he wasn't smart enough, that he didn't have speaking skills. And I think this is very important. Very, very important, because the moment we unraveled that was the wound, that was the unresolved pain and belief that he's been carrying, and the way he responds from that wound is shutting down whenever someone shames him. If he's not fast enough when he's speaking, or if he's not clear enough when he's speaking, he'll shut down, or he'll defend himself. If someone asks him, hey, is everything fine? he'll point the finger, it's you, that you, or whatever. But again, what I want to illustrate is there is a more vulnerable emotion when we're upset, when we're annoyed, when we're defensive, when we're trying to protect our point of view and our perspective, or when we're shutting down and shutting up. That is a coping response. That is a more cover-up emotion. But there's a more vulnerable called the truth underneath it all. And from his level of perception, the more vulnerable emotion was literally the belief and the pain that he was not enough, that he was not intelligent, he doesn't speak fast enough or articulate the information good enough or explains things good enough. That lack of worthiness is his pain, is his wound. And the way he responded from that wound immediately, that got triggered when I responded in an annoyed manner, the way he coped was to pull back and shut down. And when I went back to talk to him about what I discovered about me, he understood where I was coming from, and he felt more open to discuss, hence more safe. He felt now safe. Oh, let me share. And he proceeded still to kind of defend himself. And then I said to him, I said, I hear you. And I know what I did. I know that when I acted in a annoyed way, you shut down. And I know why, because for you, it's a wound already when you can't express yourself, it hurts you. When someone shames you for doing it or not doing it. I go, but let's go underneath it. Let's go underneath the need of you needing to explain that or defend that. And when he was able to drop into that understanding, that shame of feeling not enough and potentially stupid, like the core is, I'm not enough, I'm not smart enough. He literally felt like he wanted to cry. In turn, I'm the one that began crying. Because we're connected. And when you're connected with someone, you can feel someone. And I literally began getting emotional and crying. And I said to him, I said, this is so weird. Why do I feel like crying? And as I was crying, he said, because I feel like crying. You just picked up on that. So all that to say, when you allow yourself to be vulnerable, instead of stay stuck in your cover-up emotions, in your protective, coping self and identity, when you allow yourself to go underneath it all, that's the truth. That's the real stuff. That's going there and understanding where the wound is you finally being able to know how to address it. I then was able to know how to address it. I was able to implement a method for me, and in turn told my significant other, this is what's going to create safety. By you delivering this and doing this, whenever you're wanting to know this is going to make it easier for me to feel safe in our conversations. And in turn, I will know for him his wound. I will know how to respond. It's like the more we know what's hurting us, ultimately, what affects us, we now can deliver it to our significant other and say, this is what hurts me. I need to approach now this pain of mine in a more aware space, right? Approach it from a more aware state And those that I love, I want them to join me in this new approach to this wound of mine. And so now I know how to approach him, and now he knows how to approach me. And we genuinely have compassion for one another. See, that's very important. Having compassion, true compassion, right there, you know, when you have true compassion, that you really understand the person, that you felt into the person. You're not making it up. You're not just saying, I understand you just to get it over with. You're really feeling him. You're really bonding emotionally. You're having a true emotional connection. And of course, we grew closer. So hopefully my personal experience brought perspective on how being vulnerable is the only way. If you want to have a healthy relationship with your significant other, if you want your significant other to genuinely open his heart more and more with you and to embark on this journey of understanding you, the only way you can really achieve them to really desire to understand you is if you keep it real. If you actually share with him or her what's happening underneath all these emotions that are just a cover-up. When we're capable of giving someone the backstory as to why we respond the way that we do, and if you're aware that it stems from childhood trauma and you share with them, it hits different. The person doesn't feel like they're the problem. The person doesn't feel like they're being judged, like they're wrong. It gives them insight that it's you dealing, responding, reacting from those wounds, childhood wounds. And it just hits different. People won't take it as personal. I feel like this is so powerful, like so important for us to understand that always when someone understands why people behave the way that they do, and there's a reason behind it, especially a childhood trauma or childhood wounds or experiences that cause for this person to have this particular reality and response, it just hits different. You don't no longer feel like you're targeted, so to speak. And as I said, we only grew closer by doing this. He felt understood. He then realized, whoa, I'm shutting down and I'm feeling like alone because I wasn't allowing myself to be with my pain of my wound of feeling like not enough, of feeling not intelligent enough, of feeling not adequate enough to speak and to share, basically speak his truth. And I'll be damned if I will contribute to that. I'm all about speaking my truth. And the only way that I can continue to speak my truth and be in my truth is if my significant other is doing the same thing as well. Because I know how beneficial it is for me and the freedom it gives me. And if you love someone and you take it as your best interest and you take it as part of you, you want the very same thing for them. You want them to feel heard. You want them to feel honored. You want them to feel free. You want them to feel in whatever state they're in, validated. So because I know what I want to feel, I know that he wants to feel the same way, whether if he knows it or not. So hopefully this paints the picture in terms of the power of vulnerability and how it is the only way to genuine healing. Is we got to get down to the root of it to really know what to give it, to really know how and why we're even operating in the way that we're operating. And please, if you have any comments, questions, message me, and I'll be more than happy to possibly do a video in regards to your question to provide clarity. That'll be exciting and fun. Anyway, with all the love and full acceptance, Josie.